Tonight, uncovering some deadly experiments.
My mother had been given radioactive iron. She was used, abused.
It was shrouded in the old atomic secrecy that was a carryover from the war, so that there was every intent to deceive the public.
Get to the truth fast before they bury everything. Before the government hides everything and you can't find nothing out. Putting it in boxes and crates and hiding everything from the public.
How Western governments secretly use their own citizens as guinea pigs in hazardous and sometimes lethal radiation experiments.
Good evening, I'm Knowlton Nash. Many strange things have been excused or rationalized in the name of science, but perhaps none so strange as those revealed in tonight's documentary. The film uncovers a shocking history of gruesome experiments carried out on both the living and the dead. From the early 1950s until the mid-1970s, British, American, and Canadian scientists used civilian patients for military-funded radiation experiments, in many cases without the patient's knowledge or informed consent. The scientists were trying to learn more about how soldiers would be affected by atomic warfare. Presented by journalist Jerry Thompson, here is Deadly Experiments.
"50 years ago, in the barren deserts of New Mexico, American scientists working on the Manhattan Project exploded the world's first atomic bomb, Trinity. What remained a secret for 50 years was that the team of scientists that developed the atomic bomb had secretly injected American civilians with plutonium to see what happened. They were not alone. Throughout the Cold War, scientists carried out hundreds of radiation experiments on vulnerable people. They used cancer patients to test the effects of radiation on the human body. They injected hundreds of pregnant women with radioactive isotopes. They secretly removed the bones from dead children and adults to experiment on. This film tells the story of how scientific arrogance and Cold War zeal led doctors on both sides of the Atlantic to carry out deadly experiments. Albuquerque, New Mexico. The human radiation experiments would never have come to light were it not for the persistence of a small-town reporter who stumbled across a story that would eventually earn her a Pulitzer Prize. Eileen Wellsome had gone to look at some scientific papers in a military archive.
It was the spring of 1987. It was about this time of year, and they brought me out a stack of reports. And I sat there and I began to read these documents. I was just about to put them away and go home for the day when I found a footnote in the back of one of these documents. There was a reference to 18 people who had been injected with plutonium. I mean, there was something about it that I found repugnant, that human beings were injected with a material which is used to trigger atomic bombs. And I wanted to find out everything I could about the experiment, who these people were, what happened to them, how the United States government could allow something like this to happen.
The plutonium experiment was conceived in New Mexico in the 1940s by scientists developing the atomic bomb at Los Alamos. Once a tiny village, Los Alamos is now one of the world's biggest and most secretive nuclear weapons laboratories.
I called Los Alamos and I said I would like to know more about this experiment in which 18 people were injected with plutonium. He said, "That's preposterous. Los Alamos never had anything to do with people injected with plutonium." This was in 1987. I said, "Well, sir, I'm afraid you're wrong. They did so, and the documents show that to be a fact."
Eileen Welsum set about tracing the 18 hospital patients who'd been injected with plutonium. But the trail was 40 years old, and their identities were hidden by a code. So for 2 years, she crisscrossed the country trying to track them down. And then one day, she found a reference hidden in a file to a patient codenamed Cal 3, who had lived in a small town in Texas.
Right then, a light went off in my head, and I thought, I can find somebody in Italy, Texas. That's a small enough place.
Using other clues, it took Eileen Welsum a single phone call to identify her first plutonium victim, a black man named Elmer Allen. Elmer had died the year before, but his family still lived in the town. They were regular churchgoers, but Elmer had been little more than the town drunk, a man even his family dismissed as a nobody.
We were just totally taken aback because we all thought my father was so insignificant. We had no idea that he could have been used in experiments that was this serious, this important. It's one of the most horrendous things I've ever heard that's been done to human beings, injecting them with something as toxic as plutonium, secretly, not really letting these people know.
Elmer Allen's career as a guinea pig for the American government began in 1947. He'd been working as a railway porter in San Francisco when he injured his leg in a fall from a train. He was admitted to the University Hospital for treatment, but his leg failed to heal properly, and a doctor at the hospital diagnosed cancer of the bone. Then on July 18th, 1947, Elmer's doctors loaded a syringe with a substance so secret it was only known as the product. Elmer was to be injected with what scientists thought at the time was the most toxic element known to man, plutonium.
Well, it's hazardous because it's extremely toxic. If it gets into the human system, it tends to concentrate in the bones. The lifetime tolerance that's permitted for a human being is about 6/10 of a microgram. That's 6/10 of a millionth of a gram.
The manufacture of plutonium in industrial quantities for the first time was a vital part of the Manhattan Project. But its toxicity presented a formidable problem, according to scientists who still defend the plutonium injections.
The upper levels of management were deeply concerned that some of their most important, crucial people would become overexposed with plutonium and might suffer some sort of serious health consequences. They were vital to the project, and they didn't want them put out of commission.
The scientists decided the only way to find out how plutonium behaved in the body was to experiment on humans. They chose to inject hospital patients, a decision condemned by doctors who have studied the experiments.
The researchers themselves didn't make the sacrifice. They didn't inject themselves. They didn't inject their children. They didn't inject their wives. They didn't do that. They decided to pick these unsuspecting civilian victims who were generally uneducated and minority.
4-year-old Simeon Shaw was severely ill with leukemia. He was injected with almost 3 times the supposed safe dose of plutonium. He died 8 months later. Ida Schultz Carlton had hepatitis. She got 5 times the safe dose. And Albert Stevens was injected with 90 times the tolerance dose of plutonium. But sometimes the cancers caused by plutonium can take decades to appear. And like half the subjects, Albert survived for years afterwards.
None of these people were harmed. None of them who died, 20, 25, 30 years after the event showed any signs of having been damaged in any way.
But not all the patients survived so long. Dermatitis sufferer Fred Sowers was given 6 times the safe dose. Like half the patients, he died within 18 months.
Some of the patients might have lived on a relatively normal life. On the other hand, it might have caused early death in certain of the patients.
Manhattan Project scientist Carl Morgan is now a world authority on the dangers of radiation. He remains strongly critical of the plutonium experiment.
It was a terrible gamble with humans. It was something I'm thankful I never condoned among those scientists under my supervision.
Can we be certain that those who were injected did not go through considerably more suffering than they otherwise would have before they died?
I can't say one way or another. Who knows?
Does that not matter?
It would matter if you knew, but we don't know.
We do know what happened to Elmer Allen. He was injected with twice what was then thought to be a safe level of plutonium. 3 days later, his leg was amputated. The doctors told him he had cancer, but as it turned out, they were almost certainly wrong.
What I think happened is they may have made a mistake and thought he had cancer. Someone did. They put him in the guinea pig protocol. He got the plutonium. They realized he didn't have cancer, and they had to take his leg off to get rid of the plutonium.
The man who was codenamed Cal-3 by the scientists who secretly injected him with plutonium died in 1991.
This particular experiment, I do feel now, robbed me of a relationship with my father. I'll never be able to recapture that. I'll never be able to tell him, I do now understand what you were trying to say. I do understand how you do feel. As far as I'm concerned, my father died on July 18th, 1947. The person that I lived with for 44 years after that was Cal-3, one of America's human nuclear guinea pigs.
Scientists are still split over whether the plutonium experiment was of any value at all. Its defenders maintain it was crucial to the success of the Manhattan Project.
What the data from the human plutonium study set out to do has in fact done its job. And the largest, most unknown enterprise in the history of human engineering and technology was taken with no industrial disasters.
If you look at the International Commission on Radiation Protection standard for plutonium, they specifically look at this information and they throw it away because the science was so poor. They discarded this information. They used the animal experiments, not these human experiments.
There still can't be any justification for injecting someone with a poisonous substance without telling them, can there?
I don't like the tenor of your questions. I'm not prepared to talk about the ethics of this matter. It's out of my realm. I'm prepared to talk about the science.
Eileen Welsom's investigation into plutonium injections was finally published in November 1993. In the months that followed, there came reports of other, equally disturbing radiation experiments, many carried out in the 1950s under the bizarre code name Project Sunshine. As part of Project Sunshine, children, hospital patients, and pregnant women were exposed to radioactive substances in secret experiments. In a CBC interview, Dr. Willard Libby, the head of Project Sunshine, staunchly defended atomic testing as a necessary evil.
Or would we prefer to run what is to me a much larger risk, namely the risk of annihilation which might result if we surrendered the weapons which are so essential to our freedom and our actual survival.
What Dr. Libby did not say, however, was that he and other top scientists in Washington were privately worried about the effects of atom bomb testing. So worried, they decided to launch a secret study of human corpses. As the Cold War intensified, so did the frequency of above-ground nuclear tests. The bombs got much bigger. The newest superweapons hurled vast amounts of radioactive debris into the atmosphere. And as the radiation rained back down on Earth, thousands of miles away, the implications began to sink in. As radiation levels rose, scientists and government officials began to speculate about how much abuse the world could tolerate. They decided the only way to find out was to experiment on human bodies. On January 18, 1955, scientists gathered at the Atomic Energy Commission in Washington for a secret conference to plan Project Sunshine. A transcript obtained by CBC confirms that a worldwide body-snatching network was organized and set in motion at that meeting. We've used actors to recreate portions of that meeting.
The conference here, as before, is a classified conference. I will assume that no one is present who is not cleared for restricted data.
Now, I'm sure that the importance of the Sunshine Project is obvious to all of you, but to keep the record straight, I would like to say that there is no effort which the AEC has been engaged in, which, to my mind, is more important than this project.
We had a very simple and naive concept of atomic warfare. We had a picture of use of a large number of small atomic weapons, detonated at a sufficient height to give the greatest blast damage. We were sure with use of this sort, there'd be very little fallout. And now we've developed superweapons. So we asked the question, what is the number of atomic weapons we can use under circumstances of this sort without endangering the human race? How many bombs can we detonate without producing a race of monsters?
That's what the whole study is about, really. To relate the degrees of environmental contamination to the ultimate deposition in man.
By far the most important gap in our data is human samples. So if anybody knows how to do a good job of body snatching, they will be serving their country. Now, we've hired an expensive law firm to look into the law of body snatching, and it's not very encouraging. It shows how very difficult it's going to be to do it legally. It is a delicate problem of public relations, obviously.
I don't think that in other areas where one wants human material collected, you've ever been successful unless you've had someone locally responsible who got paid by the sample.
Before coming down to this conference, I talked at some length with the dean of the Columbia Medical School. And he has contacts all over the world where he's sure we can make arrangements. As far as getting the samples, it can be done. We've set up the following stations for complete sampling. We have centers at Vancouver, Houston, and New York. Now, we have 20 coming in from Vancouver and 20 from Houston, in that range, that have already been taken.
Between 1955 and 1970, hospital pathologists at 17 locations around the world, including Canada, secretly removed body parts from 9,000 corpses and sent them to U.S. government laboratories to be analyzed for fallout. From another secret document, the 1956 annual report on the body snatching operation, we learned that in the first year alone, tissue and bone samples from 165 human bodies were collected at Vancouver General Hospital and sent to the United States for radiation analysis. In the spring of 1995, as these documents were declassified, a U.S. government report said that local hospital officials around the world may have been deceived by the AEC about the real purpose of the secret operation, but most still cooperated willingly. None of the Vancouver doctors who agreed to supply body parts is alive today, so it's not clear who gave approval to Canada's role in Project Sunshine. The operation ran from 1955 until 1962. There is no indication that the next of kin gave consent or even knew that body parts had been taken. In Britain, where thousands more bodies were taken for Project Sunshine, some of the families did find out. On the Welsh island of Anglesey, a 6-month-old baby girl named Valerie Williams died suddenly in the summer of 1957.
I woke up in the morning and the baby was fighting for breath. And phoned the doctor. He came and immediately called for an ambulance. Took her to Bangor. On the journey to the hospital, she smiled at me, and that's haunted me ever since, really, you know. She smiled, you know. But within an hour or two, she was dead.
Valerie's leg bones were then removed by a hospital pathologist and sent to the British Nuclear Laboratory at Harwell. To stop them seeing what had been done to the baby's body, Valerie's parents were not allowed to dress their daughter for the funeral.
I asked if I could put a christening robe on her, but I wasn't allowed to. And that upset me terribly, because she wasn't christened, you see.
Did anyone ever say anything to you about an experiment?
Definitely not. No way. Nobody asked anything.
No one asked me about doing things like that to her, taking bits and pieces from her, no. It's a terrible thing to do.
In Britain, the Project Sunshine experiments on dead children were organized by the government's Medical Research Council.
Bones were removed from corpses without the permission of the relatives. Why wasn't permission sought?
It has to be said it was not considered standard practice to obtain such permission at that time. And my understanding is that there is still a question of legal doubt as to where ownership, if one can use that word, rests of a body.
There must be a lot of people at home, sitting at home now, having had the nearest and dearest in car clashes and things, not knowing that they've had bits of them as well, you know, for all we know.
In Cincinnati, cancer patients were offered a special kind of radiation therapy. Mike Spinagel's wife had no idea he was about to become part of an experiment.
All they said to me was, "We've talked to your husband, and he has agreed to have this radiation treatment, period." There was no mention of experimentation or what it was for or anything else. That's all.
Beatrice Player was also offered what her family thought was radiation therapy.
From the beginning, it was stated to my father that it's treatment anytime they talked to my mother. At no time did anyone in our family know that she was part of an experiment. Thought that she was just part of a treatment.
What none of the patients knew was that the doctor who was supposed to be treating them, Eugene Sanger, was actually performing a human radiation experiment for the American military. The Pentagon had pressured Carl Morgan to perform similar experiments. But his work on animals had convinced him it would be wrong to experiment on humans, and so he refused.
I was convinced that high-level exposure not only could cause death, but it could cause what apparently was excruciating pain to these animals, and undoubtedly would do the same to humans.
Dr. Sanger's experimental subjects were isolated in specially built chambers like these and exposed to intense radiation. Over a period of 11 years, 88 cancer patients were irradiated in Cincinnati. All of them died, some killed by their cancers, but many by the radiation therapy. Dr. Sanger still claims he was trying to cure his patients. Other doctors say they were denied treatment so the scientists could observe their radiation sickness.
They had to intentionally tell the staff Don't treat these like real patients. Just let them be sick and vomit. Until the patients really begged for treatment on their own, they were denied treatment for nausea and vomiting. Secondly, the direction of the dose that was planned was from one side. Now, that was not proper medical treatment, which would go all the way around the body. One side mimics military research.
The effects of the radiation on Mike Spinagle were dramatic.
I hadn't the faintest idea that death was that close to him. And it was only after he had the whole body radiation that he just went downhill. Well, within a month he was dead.
The radiation had equally dramatic effects on Beatrice Player.
She died in May. So within a month, she went from 110 pounds to 67 pounds. It's real upsetting, but it's more upsetting to find out after 30 years that she was part of the experiment.
Despite repeated requests, Dr. Eugene Sanger refused to be interviewed for this film.
If I had one thing to say to him, I would say, let me try that on you and see how would you feel. Let me try what you tried on my wife. Let me try the same whole body radiation and see how long you'll survive.
I would say, you had no right to do this. You killed my husband, and I think you ought to admit what all of you have done.
The Cincinnati experiment was carried out by American doctors for the American military. Here in Canada, doctors also carried out a series of radiation experiments paid for by the military. In Montreal at Royal Victoria Hospital, 325 cancer patients were given whole body doses of radiation as therapy. The Canadian military paid Dr. Jean Bouchard to write a report on the side effects and survival rates. At McGill University, the military paid for a study of how radiation affects skin grafts. Also at McGill, a young doctor named David Bates, who inhaled radioactive xenon gas himself, along with 40 other volunteers in a study of emphysema, says very little was known then about what radiation would do, and everybody worried about nuclear war.
We needed to know as much as anybody else knew about the biological effects of radiation. That became very important information. We needed to be very expert on treatment.
Dr. Bates says that even though Canada had no atomic weapons, it was assumed that we would suffer radiation casualties nonetheless.
And of course, as soon as the intercontinental ballistic missile came in, we realized there was virtually no way of stopping it. The fear that there was real. I mean, this was not artificial. The Russians had made those weapons. They were targeted on U.S. cities, and we assume Canadian cities as well.
In the late 1960s and early 70s at Princess Margaret Hospital in Toronto, the military paid for a predictive study of vomiting in irradiated military personnel. But the patients were civilians, and the title page is very misleading. At first glance, it appears that Dr. W.D. Ryder gave 271 cancer patients extremely high doses of whole-body radiation to find out how soon, how often, and how long they would vomit, so that military officials could then predict how radiation in combat would affect soldiers. But Dr. Richard Hasselback, who worked with Dr. Ryder, says the high doses of radiation were used as a preemptive strike against the spread of cancer in the days before chemotherapy.
They would get sick. They'd vomit for about 6 hours afterwards, and we'd certainly see dramatic changes in their blood. Now, with the blood counts that we had obtained, the American military postulated that if they could take counts on people who had been exposed to radiation in excessive doses, look at their blood counts, then they could back calculate and estimate what type of dose of radiation they'd received at the time of a nuclear accident. And from that also they could project their outlook and decide whether a bone marrow transplant might be appropriate.
We asked Dr. Michael Chamberlain, head of nuclear medicine at Ottawa Civic Hospital, whether the whole body radiation to stop the spread of cancer was considered a legitimate medical treatment at the time.
They were valid treatments.
No doubt about that.
I've no doubt about that. When I first saw the title myself, a predictive study of the incidence of vomiting in irradiated military personnel, that immediately made me think that military personnel had been irradiated for the purpose of this experiment.
When in fact it was a study of civilians.
It was data derived from perfectly proper treatment of patients, of civilians, then applied to, the key word is predictive, of course, applied to what might happen in irradiated military personnel.
You didn't go out and do this study on behalf of the military.
It wasn't even a remote thought in our minds. It only came out 3, 4, 5 years later when the request came from Washington for details on our data, because they thought it might have that implication, but it certainly wasn't in our mind. We were trying to treat patients.
In Britain as well, doctors carried out radiation experiments for the military. This scientific paper describes how, in 1956, cancer patients at Oxford's Churchill Hospital were given doses of whole-body irradiation. Dr. Alice Stewart is an expert on the effects of radiation on the human body. She says the radiation used in the Churchill experiments could not have helped the patients.
To give a whole body dose of the order that's needed to kill the cancer automatically kills the patient. So they can't have been giving it. There can't have been any therapy.
So what were they doing?
I don't know. I think that they were using their very ill patients to have a test done before and after this dose.
Like Dr. Sanger in Cincinnati, the Churchill Hospital scientists insist the experiments they carried out were purely medical and aimed at treating the patients. But could the Churchill experiments, like those in Cincinnati, also have a military application?
These experiments clearly would have been a military interest. The bone marrow effects of radiation are one of the things that would happen to soldiers, and these experiments were designed in part to determine what those effects were.
Even though the doses involved were low, many of these medical experiments have left a tragic legacy.
But don't worry about it.
In Nashville, Tennessee, in the late 40s, scientists gave radioactive iron to 800 pregnant women whose metabolism they were studying. Now the subjects of the experiment, who say they were never told, are suing Vanderbilt University for millions of dollars and are meeting to share their experiences.
My name is Ron Ham. I was born February 9th, 1947 at Vanderbilt Hospital in Nashville, Tennessee. I come to know at age 46 and a half that my mother had been given radioactive iron, some sort of concoction. I feel that my mother was raped. She was taken and violated, given something she did not ask for, used, abused. And if those words sound harsh, somebody will have to deal with it. We all have been violated in the worst possible way.
I went to Vanderbilt Hospital because it was recommended highly as one of the best hospitals in the country, and I tried to eat everything they said to eat. I tried to do everything they said to have a healthy child, and then they give me the radioactive iron that I know nothing of and violated my child.
My mother was sick from 1945 until she died on my birthday, July 25th, 1979. I have a brother that died in 1990. He was a police officer. He died of cancer. I know they both died because of the radiation. I know that.
My mother passed away a few years ago. She talked about getting a drink, and they called it a cocktail, and they told her to take it. And she took it, of course, and they told her it was good for her baby, which was me.
But it wasn't only in America that scientists exposed unborn babies to radiation. Similar experiments were carried out in hospitals all over Britain. In Liverpool in 1953, more than 40 unborn babies were exposed when doctors injected their mothers with radioactive sodium solutions in a study of the placenta. Some of the women subsequently had abortions. Their fetuses were finely minced to measure the radioactivity they had absorbed. And in 1952 and 1957 at London's University College Hospital, 30 pregnant women were given radioactive iodine in studies of the thyroid gland. One of the doctors who carried out the experiments claims the doses he used were harmless.
We're all being radiated all the time, so-called background radiation from the sky, from the buildings that we're in at the moment, and from the earth underneath us. If we give less than that, it can't do much harm, and you can't prove that it does any harm.
But 2 years before Dr. Hullman's experiment, a study had shown that exposing a pregnant woman to even a single X-ray examination could increase her child's chances of developing cancer. That work was carried out by Dr. Alice Stewart.
Pregnant women should be absolutely out on any story to do with radiation. We have evidence that, for instance, the commonest cause probably of childhood cancers is natural background radiation. So if you add anything to that, you're adding to what is already a perceptible risk.
Would you say that the doses that you used in the experiment were safe?
Yes, both to the patient herself and to the baby or the fetus.
There is no dose of radiation that is safe with respect to production of cancer. There never has been any evidence that such a safe dose exists.
Former Manhattan Project scientist John Goffman is a world authority on the dangers of low-level radiation.
I worked on that question for 20 years, and in 1990 I published what I consider a definitive view, namely, with 9 separate human studies at low doses, cancer was produced.
Dr. Hullman never carried out a follow-up study of the women or children in his experiment to see if any of them had developed cancer.
It didn't seem to be necessary then. And I'm not sure it really would be necessary now, because we know very well the kind of doses that cause cancer and leukemia, and they're many times higher.
The doctors at Vanderbilt claimed that the doses of radiation they gave were harmless. But a follow-up study found a 4-fold increase in cancer among the exposed children. Emma Kraft was one of the pregnant women who was given radioactive iron. In 1946, she gave birth to her daughter Carolyn. For the first 6 years of her life, Carolyn was a normal, healthy child. Then, in 1956, Emma found a growth on Carolyn's leg and took her to be examined by a specialist.
He came down and told me that it was cancer. And that just tore me up. Nobody had cancer in my family, but I'd heard what a horrible thing it was. It went up through her spine and paralyzed her. Then went to her heart. Went to her lungs. And it come out in her mouth. It was horrible.
Carolyn Kraft died in 1958, aged 11.
I did nearly commit suicide. I thought about getting in my car and just driving, closing my eyes. But I had 3 more girls. I said, I can't do that.
It was not until 1993 that Emma Kraft discovered that she had been part of the Vanderbilt experiment and that Carolyn died from a rare form of cancer which has been linked to radiation exposure.
I thought it was God's doing. I accepted her death on account of that. I thought it was God's will.
and then find out 50 years later that it wasn't, that a human beings did it.
In British hospitals between 1950 and 60, at least 390 unborn babies were exposed to radiation in experiments similar to the one in Nashville. But nobody knows how many cancers may have resulted because, unlike in America, no follow-up studies have been carried out. And one British experiment was even more disturbing than that at Vanderbilt. In a medical experiment at Hammersmith Hospital in 1952, radioactive sodium was injected directly into the placentas of 270 women just before they gave birth, using a specially designed syringe.
I can't understand how they could begin to do it. It's my belief that the 270 offspring, I think some died, but of those that lived and had offspring, there probably is what I can only describe as an untraceable effect of this radiation. It must have had some effect.
The Medical Research Council, who conducted the experiment, say the doses were low and that they see no need for a study to follow up the children who were exposed to the radiation.
I would doubt whether this would yield anything of any great value, and again I think there would almost certainly be 42 years on very considerable practical problems in identifying precisely which individuals were involved.
Do you not think it's an important question, though?
I think it's important. I mean, at one level it might be regarded as an important question, but I candidly would suggest that we have better and more important things to be using medical research monies for now.
In a small town not far from Boston, human radiation experiments continued at a home for retarded children and at a local reform school.
Am I yelling out the windows?
Yelling? There's no windows left. Hey, you coming to see me today or what? Am I getting company?
In 1952, Austin LaRock and Charlie Dyer were both pupils at the Fernald State School. Both had ended up here because of family problems. When they were asked to join a special science club, Austin in particular was delighted.
No, because the kitchen's downstairs on the first floor here. Came here when I was 10. The first visitor I had, I was about 16 or 17 years old. So you figure all them years, nobody's ever come to visit me. So to have somebody come up and offer me an opportunity to become something worthwhile in my life, that's a wonderful feeling, believe me.
The members of the science club enjoyed special privileges over the other children.
They took us to the movies, baseball games, and then they gave us these little gifts and stuff, like watches. Oh, I was tickled pink for the watches and all this and that. Just to get out of the building and off the grounds, it was something new to experiment or something.
As part of the science club, the children ate special breakfasts of oatmeal, milk, and pills. What they weren't told was that the milk on their cereal had been laced with radioactive calcium by scientists carrying out a nutritional experiment. Charlie didn't always want to eat his breakfasts.
Sometimes I was upset with it. When they would give me, I'd get a little hot-tempered, and they used to sit me down and, come on now, take it easy. You all right? Yeah, I'm all right. I just don't like taking these pills and stuff you people are giving me. Well, it's almost over. It's almost over. Don't worry about it. It won't harm you.
After a few months, the science club disbanded. Austin and Charlie thought nothing more about their special breakfasts for the next 40 years. And then, in 1993, the experiment at Fernald hit the Boston headlines. Charlie and Austin were horrified to discover that, as members of the science club, they had been used as human guinea pigs.
I feel that I was betrayed because I feel that the science club was set up as a bribery towards children by offering these little things in return for what they were doing and not telling them what they were doing to them in the first place.
Felix Bronner was one of the scientists who conducted the experiment. He admits the use of radiation was deliberately concealed.
There had been nuclear bombs. People were therefore understandably and appropriately afraid of radioactivity on the one hand. At the same time, scientists were very much excited about the possibility of using radioactive traces. There was a conflict between how much do you tell and how much don't you tell, how do you put people off, don't you put people off.
Dr. Bronner claims the amount of radiation the children were given was harmless. But Charlie Dyer is worried about the effect it may have had on his children.
I had a daughter that was born with whole organs reversed on one side. They found her heart and organs all reversed. They say it's 1 out of 1,000 born like that. And my other daughter, she was born with a hole in her heart and her lungs. That's my youngest one.
The fears are unjustified, but fears of having been a victim are very satisfying. And people like to be in that situation often.
I just think it's very deplorable that the American people can allow such a thing to happen in this country especially. That's what's upsetting more than anything else, that we've been used in children that were supposed to be helped as guinea pigs. I just can't buy it.
Over the past several years, a long list of radiation experiments have come to light. More than 70 separate studies in Britain, 59 in the United States, involving 15,000 human subjects. The Americans held a full public inquiry, and class action lawsuits are underway. In Canada, we found reference to 7 studies involving nearly 700 civilians, but there's been no inquiry here, so the total number of experiments and human subjects is still not known. Some have argued that data gathered in secret radiation experiments was the scientific information that led to a ban on atmospheric testing of nuclear weapons. Others say the end did not justify the means. As for the body snatching scheme in Vancouver, Dr. Michael Chamberlain says,
I can't approve of that. Of course, I voluntarily sign my driver's license or donate my body for whatever purpose after death. No, I can't approve of this being done without consent. It might have been more difficult, more troublesome to obtain that consent, but it could have been done.
The unfortunate thing about all that was that it was shrouded in the old atomic secrecy that was a carryover from the war, so that there was every intent to deceive the public at the political level, every intent.
There needs to be an investigation about what went on during this period to see if patients were victimized for some other purpose.
Get to the truth fast before they bury everything. Before the government hides everything and you can't find nothing out. Because that's what the government does, putting it in boxes and crates and hiding everything from the public. You'll never find out until another 30 years from now. Sometimes you'll never find out.